Hi, this is Brandy. Thanks for stopping by. In this video, we're going to be taking these two dressers, which I got for free off of OfferUp, and we're going to be giving them a new life. So this tall dresser here has some minor damage on the top. There's some scrapes and scratches. There's a piece of veneer that's missing from the bottom of one of these drawers, as you can see here. The bottom right corner had some damage as well. I really admire the hardware on these pieces, especially these old school pulls that are on these bottom drawers, as well as the knobs on the top drawers and the other dresser as well. The drawers slide out pretty easily, so no issue there. This longer dresser definitely has more issues on the top than the other one. There are some pretty deep scratches, as you can see here. There's some stain over there. There was a bunch of tape all over the place that didn't seem to be holding anything. It was just there. So just some minor work in general. Down here on the bottom corner, there was another little piece of chipped veneer. But overall, I was really excited to pick up these two dressers. I just love the vintage look. Inside these doors was one of my favorite parts about the dresser because it had these other drawers inside. So that was really exciting, and I couldn't wait to get to work on this project. The first thing that I did was remove all of the hardware from both dressers. I always make sure to keep all of my hardware in a container together for the duration of the project, just so I don't lose it, even if I decide I'm going to change the hardware. So next step is going to be to scrub these things down. It's super important to always thoroughly clean the furniture before you do anything, especially before you paint. You don't want to have dirt and grime and nastiness underneath your paint. So I just used some Dawn dish soap and water and gave both dressers a really good scrubbing. And then once I was finished scrubbing with the Dawn, I went back and rinsed everything off with a clean wet rag. Then I got out the vacuum and I just went in with the vacuum and tried to get as much dust and dirt out of there as possible. And the funny thing is while I was doing all this, I backed up too far and I knocked over a whole row of drawers, as you can see here, and luckily nothing got damaged. And there are a ton of drawers. There was 19 drawers. So over here on the top left corner of the tall dresser, there was a piece of it coming off. So I just applied some wood glue in between, and then I pulled out the clamp and I clamped that together, and then I left it there for a couple hours, and that seemed to do the trick. The next step was to go in with some wood filler and just fill in all those scratches and dings that were all over the place. I did it in both of the dressers. I also went through and took a look at all of the drawers, and anywhere that was damaged I went ahead and filled in with that wood filler. Once all of the wood filler had dried, I came in with some 150 grit sandpaper and I just went through and sanded everything down smooth. I went over everything with the 150 grit, and then I circled back and went over everything again with 220 grit, just to have that smooth surface. The next thing I did was went inside and started cleaning up the hardware. I just used some Dawn dish soap and water to scrub everything down. Once everything was clean, I took a piece of cardboard box and I just plugged in all of the pulls and handles into the hardware box. It just makes it a lot easier for to spray paint it once they're in there. That way I don't have pieces rolling around all over the place. They're nice and sturdy and affixed to that cardboard. There were a couple of the insides of those poles that I couldn't affix to anything, so those were just going to sit on top loose. Then I took everything outside and I planned on just respraying it with gold. So I used the Rustoleum metallic in the pure gold color that I picked up at the hardware store down the street, and I gave it a good shaking, and then I just went through and sprayed everything on that first coat. While I was waiting for the hardware to dry, I went ahead and started applying this gray primer that I had on hand to all of the drawers and the dressers themselves. I used a roller, and then any little sections that were kind of smaller I just did with a little handheld brush. Once I had the primer on all of the drawers, I went ahead and started with the base of the dressers. I did it in this Varathane aged walnut wood stain, and so I thought it would be a nice contrast with the green that I planned on painting the dressers. So I went ahead and applied a liberal amount to the base, and then I circled back and wiped off the excess afterwards. So while the stain was drying, I went ahead and started applying the primer to both dressers. While the dressers were drying, I brought in all 19 of these drawers into the house, lined them up, and I was ready to apply the first coat of paint. So I used for this project the Behr chalk paint in the color Secret Meadow. It's a deep green that I thought would look really nice with the gold accents. So I went ahead and put it into a little container. I gave it a good stirring, and then I went ahead and just started brushing it onto the drawers. I had a light mister on hand. That way I could mist the drawers before or during the application of the paint, just to kind of make sure that the paint was moving smoothly and not clumping up or drying out too fast. The color actually had some really good coverage on the first coat, but I knew that I was still going to need to apply a couple more coats, but I was really pleased with how quickly that deep color applied. Once I'd painted all the drawers, I let those dry, and then I brought in both dressers and I started applying the first coat of paint to those dressers. By the time I was done painting the two dressers, the drawers were dry, and I went ahead and came in with some 220 grit sandpaper that I just wrapped around the sanding block, and I went over all of the drawers just to kind of sand them down, get any rough spots out before moving on to coat number 2. After the light sanding, I came in with some Tack cloth and just wiped off all of the dust from everything before applying the next coat of paint. I did a total of 3 coats of paint, allowing time for drying in between and then doing that light sanding before applying the next coat. In the meantime, I went ahead and moved to the 2 doors on the longer dresser, and I planned to put a stencil all around the outside, which I later decided to just do a single strip because I wasn't quite sure how it was going to work going all around the outside. I'm not a professional on stencils. This was actually the second time that I had used one. So I just kind of centered it and then I taped it down. Once that I felt it was centered and nice and secured to the door, I went ahead and just put a little bit of the gold paint on a paper plate just to make it easier for me to grab with the brush. I just used this small little brush and I dabbed it into the paint and then tapped it a bunch of times to get rid of all the excess so that I wasn't globbing it on. You really don't want to glob paint on when you're doing stencil, otherwise it becomes messy. So you want it to almost be kind of dry. And then I just tapped it in on this. Tapped it in all over the place, putting a little bit of pressure, making sure to hold the stencil down with my other hand so it doesn't move around, because I really wanted to get crisp edges. So I did the same process on both of the doors, moving the stencil down and overlapping it to do the next portion of it. And I was very pleased with the way that they turned out. The design was nice and clear. There wasn't any blurriness in it. So the final step here for the drawers was to go ahead and apply the top coat. I used the Rustoleum chalked in the matte clear along with a foam brush. And I just brushed on a very light coat of the top coat. The top coat can look a little milky when you're putting it on, but it clears dry as long as there are no areas where you've applied too much. If you put too much, it will end up with kind of a cloudy effect to it. So I just really made sure it was a thin coat. Once the paint had dried on the dressers, I went ahead and went in with some 400 grit sandpaper just to smooth everything out prior to putting on the top coat. I actually did the same thing with the drawers before putting on the top coat, but I didn't capture that on video. So same process that I'm doing here on the dressers was done on the drawers prior to putting on that top coat. So sand it down, wipe it off with a tack cloth to make sure there is no dust. And then I went in and applied that top coat. Something important that I always make sure to do with the top coat is make sure that my brush strokes are consistent and in the same direction. You definitely don't want the top coat strokes to be in all different directions, so that'll affect the final product. And so basically I did 3 coats of paint, allowing time for dry in between, and then doing that light sanding between the coats of paint. And then I did 2 coats of the top coat on the dressers and the drawers, again leaving time to dry and then sanding in between. And actually on the tops of the dressers I did a 3rd coat for that extra protection, just because that could be a high traffic area depending on who ends up with the pieces. So these were the final finished product pictures, and I was really pleased with the way that they turned out. I went ahead and staged them here to take pictures of them and put them up on Facebook Marketplace. So I was super happy with the outcome. The before and after were just amazing, and I was very pleased in the way they turned out. A bunch of drawers, again, there were 19 drawers total, 2 doors, so it was definitely a monster of a project, but I was very pleased at the outcome. Thanks for stopping by my page, taking the time to watch this video. If you haven't already done so, please like and subscribe for future content. I will be coming out with more videos as I continue on my journey of furniture transformation, and happy to have you.